Billionaire CEO saw a little girl crying in a dress. Her words about the father-daughter dance broke him. Before we begin, we'd love to know, what city are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. And at the end, don't forget to give this story a rating from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The 4 words that changed him. She was sitting alone on the steps in a blue dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was still hoping someone would come. He didn't mean to stop, but maybe it was the stillness in her, or the way her eyes didn't flinch made him pause. She didn't ask his name. She didn't even look surprised. She just said, "It's the daddy dance. And I'm alone." That's all. No tears, no drama, just quiet heartbreak, wrapped in 4 small words. He hadn't touched grief in months, but something in him cracked wide open. And before he even knew why, he whispered back, "Then I'll be your dad, just for the dance." He thought it would be one moment. He had no idea it would become the rest of his life. The man who forgot how to feel. He used to be the kind of man people chased down just to say they shook his hand. Boardrooms, handshakes, speeches, that was Andrew Carter's world. Billionaire CEO. And ever since his wife died 8 months ago, that world had become the only thing keeping him standing. But on this Thursday afternoon, something pulled him off course. His driver made a wrong turn on the outskirts of Seattle. Instead of correcting him, Andrew had asked to be let out. He said he needed air, but the truth was, he needed silence. The kind that doesn't ask if you're okay. The kind that doesn't require an answer. He walked alone through a quiet street where nothing sparkled. His shoes hit wet pavement with barely a sound. The world knew him as the man who built empires. But inside, he was empty, functioning without living. He didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. So, when he passed a small chalkboard sign outside a rundown dance studio, he barely looked. Father-daughter dance. Today, at 5:00 p.m. And then, he saw her, a little girl in a blue dress, sitting on the steps with her hands in her lap. Her shoes were scuffed, her ribbon coming loose. She wasn't crying loudly, but the sadness in her stillness said everything. She didn't look up until he was right in front of her, and when she did, her voice was small, almost an exhale. "It's the daddy dance. And I'm alone." Just 4 words, that's all. They didn't belong to him. They shouldn't have been his to hear, but they landed straight in the hollow space where his heart used to be. He crouched down slowly, his knees cracking, reminding him how long it had been since he knelt for anything at all. "Then I'll be your dad, just for the dance," he said. There was no crowd, no camera, just a broken little girl and a broken man, meeting on the steps of a dance school between a laundromat and a deli, and neither of them realizing this wasn't just a dance. This was the moment everything changed. Sometimes, the smallest moments rewrite the rest of your life. Chapter 1. The blue dress. It had rained earlier, not a storm, just the kind of drizzle that makes everything feel quiet, as if the world's holding its breath. Andrew Carter wasn't supposed to be on this street, not in his gray suit, not in his $1,000 shoes, not with his name still echoing through the headlines from his latest tech acquisition. But that day, he'd asked the driver to let him out a few blocks early. "I need air," he'd said. But what he really needed was something no one had asked of him in months. Stillness, silence, something that didn't expect a performance. So he walked, past peeling fences and faded storefronts, past the small bakery with the closed sign flipped early, until he saw her. She didn't look up right away, just sat there, a little girl in a pale blue dress with silver sparkles at the hem, hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was still hoping someone would come. Her ballet shoes were white once, now scuffed at the toes, a little muddy, a little tired looking. Her hair had been carefully pulled into a bun, the kind only a mother's hands could manage. But the ribbon was slipping, barely holding on. She looked forgotten, not loud about it, not dramatic, just quietly left behind. He stopped walking. Didn't know why, didn't have a plan. She looked up, big blue eyes, the kind that hold too much for a child her age. Storm eyes, eyes that had already learned not to expect too much. He should have said something simple, like, "Are you okay? Or is someone coming for you?" But before he could speak, her voice broke through, soft, barely audible. A sentence so raw, so small, it hit him harder than anything he'd heard in years. "It's the daddy dance. And I'm alone." No tears, no dramatics, just truth. Plain, simple, devastating, and in that moment, Andrew Carter, tech mogul, public genius, broken widower felt something inside his chest splinter. His body moved before his brain caught up. He crouched down slowly, knees stiff from years of standing tall in places where emotions weren't allowed, lowered himself to her level, not just physically, but spiritually. "I'm not wearing the right shoes," he said quietly, glancing at his polished Oxfords, "but I promise I can still twirl." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. She blinked up at him like she didn't quite believe it. And then, after a pause, long enough to break his heart again, she nodded. He held out his hand, gently, not forcing, not leading, just offering. She placed her small fingers in his palm, and just like that, the world shifted. He didn't know her name, didn't know where her mother was, or who had let her sit out here alone, or why his chest was aching like someone had ripped it wide open. All he knew was this child had been left waiting, and he was not going to be one more person who walked past. Inside the dance studio, other fathers were already spinning their daughters in warm circles, music spilling out through the walls. He could hear laughter, claps, the squeak of rubber soles. But outside, on the quiet steps, one dance had already started. No music needed. They didn't move right away. He let her lead, and when she finally whispered, "I think we can go in now," he followed her, not as a stranger anymore, as something else, something neither of them had words for yet, but both would come to understand. Sometimes, the people we're meant to love don't come into our lives loud or grand. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, sitting alone in a blue dress, waiting for someone to choose them. He thought he was only borrowing a moment. He had no idea he was stepping into a life. Freyna. Chapter 2. The Night Shift Mother. The hospital buzzed beneath flickering fluorescent lights, the kind that made you forget what time it was. Sophie Brooks was on her 10th consecutive night shift. Her body ached in places she no longer bothered naming. The beeping of monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the sharp voices of overworked doctors. It was all background noise now. This was the rhythm of her life. Show up, survive, repeat. She hadn't seen a sunrise in 3 weeks when her phone buzzed in the break room. She almost didn't check it, but something about the quiet of that moment, the hum between alarms, made her glance. A message from her neighbor. "Emma had a great time at the dance. She'll tell you everything. Also, ask her about the man in the gray suit." Sophie frowned. "What man? What dance?" Her breath hitched. No, she hadn't forgotten anything on the calendar. She couldn't afford to. Every hour of daycare was budgeted. Every shift on the hospital schedule counted. Emma's ballet class was supposed to end before dinner, and tonight was Thursday. But then she remembered the sign Emma had pointed to in passing last week. Father-daughter dance. 5:00 p.m. Sophie had gently redirected hers, not saying no, just not now. And Emma, being Emma, hadn't argued. Now guilt pressed into her chest like a weight. She drove home in silence. No music, just the old Honda's engine murmuring beneath her as she passed dim streetlights and sleeping storefronts. The back seat still had an old juice box, a scrub top she meant to wash 3 days ago, and a lone ballet slipper that had lost its pair. Her daughter was waiting at the neighbor's place, curled on the couch like she lived there. Sophie was about to whisper an apology when she saw Emma's face, lit up, glowing, her cheeks pink from exertion, a tiara askew on her head, the tulle skirt of her blue dress dusted with glitter. She looked like joy had chosen her tonight, like someone had invited her into a story she didn't know she belonged in. Sophie knelt down. "Did you have fun, sweetheart?" Emma's eyes widened, and then she exploded, a faucet of words spilling out faster than Sophie could catch. There were lights and cookies and lemonade, and we did spins and twirls, and I didn't fall. And Mommy, he picked me. Sophie blinked. Who picked you? The man in the suit. The gray one? Emma paused to sip her juice, then continued, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was sitting outside because I didn't have a daddy to go with, but he saw me. And I told him, and he said he'd be mine just for the dance. Sophie froze. Everything inside her pulsed with two things at once. Fear, that sharp mother instinct that demands answers and locks doors. And something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Wonder. Emma wasn't frightened. She wasn't unsure. She was beaming. She looked like a girl who had been given a story she thought only happened to other kids. Sophie thanked the neighbor, who added vaguely, he seemed kind, gentle, and he really listened to her. Still, Sophie's mind raced the whole drive home. What kind of man just shows up and dances with someone else's child? What did he want? But when she looked in the rearview mirror and saw Emma tracing her tiara with one hand, smiling to herself, like she'd been kissed by magic, Sophie couldn't speak. Back home, she helped her daughter into pajamas, brushing the glitter from her dress, folding it carefully on the dresser. Emma talked the whole time, narrating every spin, every song, every cookie on the table. He called me Miss Emma, she said, and he tied my ribbon when it started to fall. Sophie tucked her in that night with more questions than answers, but one truth stood out clearly. Someone made her daughter feel special again, not pitied, not babysat, seen. When Emma drifted off to sleep, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, longer than she meant to, just watching her chest rise and fall. She thought of Emma's father, the one who had kissed her cheek one morning and then disappeared without goodbye. No letter, no support, just gone. She'd carried it all since then. Every bill, every meltdown, every birthday party, with one chair left empty. And now, a stranger in a suit had danced with her daughter. She should have been angry, but instead, she felt something shift. The next morning, Emma showed her a photo on the neighbor's phone. The man was kneeling next to her, both mid-laugh, no forced smile, no posing, just presence. There was something so gentle in the way he looked at her daughter. Sophie zoomed in, brown hair, blue eyes, a soft kind of stillness. "What's his name?" she asked. The neighbor replied casually, "Andrew Carter." The name echoed in her mind, strange and familiar. It wasn't until her lunch break at the hospital that she Googled him, and what she saw made her sit down hard on a bench in the hallway. Andrew Carter, CEO of one of the largest tech firms on the West Coast, youngest billionaire in the region, spoke at international summits, featured in Forbes. But one photo stopped her cold. His wife's funeral. The caption read, "Tech giant says goodbye after wife's long battle with cancer." Sophie stared. That was the man who had danced with Emma, not because it was expected, not because he had to, but because something in her daughter had reached the part of him still broken. And instead of looking away, he'd stayed. Sometimes the ones who feel the most alone recognize that ache in someone else. And in one silent moment, they say, "Not this time. I won't let you sit alone." Sophie didn't know what he wanted, but for the first time in years, she wondered, what if life was offering her more than just survival? Chapter 3. The Man in the Suit. 3 days had passed since the dance. Emma hadn't stopped talking about it. She twirled through the living room, reciting his words, reenacting her favorite spins, humming the songs, even when no music played. And every time she said his name, Daddy, Andrew, Sophie's chest tightened. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even fear. It was the echo of something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. That morning, a text came through. Short. Careful. Emma would like to thank you in person. Saturday, 3 p.m. If that still works. Andrew Carter didn't send emojis, didn't overstate, didn't try to charm. He simply showed up on their doorstep at 2. Cinquantinai repeat. Sophie peeked through the blinds when she heard the knock. He stood on the porch, somehow looking both confident and wildly unsure of himself. A gray blazer, black slacks, a bouquet of simple white daisies in his hand. Not roses, not showy, just enough. Emma reached the door first. The second she saw him, her face exploded with joy. "You came," she cried, throwing her arms around his waist like they'd known each other forever. Andrew froze for half a second, then melted into her hug. Sophie stood behind them, arms crossed, her heartbeat louder than she liked. When his eyes met hers, he straightened slightly. "These are for her, or for you." "Honestly, I wasn't sure," he said, lifting the bouquet awkwardly. Sophie took the flowers, her fingers brushing his just barely. She gave a polite nod. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." There was a pause, the kind that lives between two people who know silence better than small talk. "Come in," she said at last. The house wasn't much. A bookshelf, leaning slightly to the left, a mismatched couch, a pile of utility bills hidden half-heartedly beneath a magazine. But it was clean, warm, lived in. Andrew stepped inside slowly, like he was afraid to break something. Emma tugged him into the living room and began narrating every piece of crayon artwork on the fridge as if it were on display at the Met. He listened fully, not in that adult way of nodding while scrolling a phone, but with real, undivided attention. Sophie watched from the kitchen doorway. No man had ever sat on that couch without spreading out like he owned the place. Andrew didn't even lean back. He sat forward, hands loose in his lap, as Emma described her favorite snacks, her dream of having a pet turtle, and her firm belief that unicorns used to be real, but probably went extinct because they were too sparkly to hide from danger. Sophie couldn't help the ghost of a smile that rose to her lips. Still, she was careful. So, when Emma skipped off to grab her sticker book, she finally broke the quiet between them. "I want to say thank you," she began, "for what you did the other night." Andrew looked up, gently. "But I also need to be clear. I don't know you, and I have to protect her. Always." He didn't flinch, didn't defend, didn't pull out credentials or polished reassurances. "I get that," he said, voice low. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't come here with a plan." That night, I just saw her, and she reminded me of something I lost. Sophie tilted her head. "Your wife?" He blinked. A pause, then nodded once. 8 months ago. Cancer. We didn't have kids. We wanted them. But time ran out. Silence fell between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just real. Sophie looked down at her hands, fingers tangled in the hem of her sweater. "Emma's dad left when she was 3, she said quietly. No warning, no goodbye. He kissed me on the cheek, like it was any other morning, packed a bag, and disappeared. Andrew didn't say, sorry. He didn't try to fix it. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, not to cross a boundary, but to share space. You don't have to trust me, he said. Not today, not ever. If that's what you decide, I just want to be around. If she ever wants to draw or twirl or talk about unicorns and turtles. Sophie let out a laugh before she could stop it. Small, soft. The first one she'd let herself have in weeks. She is exhausting, she said. She's magic, he replied. They talked more after that. Nothing heavy, just gentle notes passed across a line neither of them wanted to cross too quickly. Favorite books? How Emma liked her grilled cheese cut. How Sophie managed night shifts without falling apart. Andrew didn't offer pity. He asked with quiet curiosity, and when Sophie answered, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Seen, not as a nurse, not as a tired mom, not as a woman someone once left. Just Sophie. When he finally stood to leave, Emma clung to his arm. Will you come again? She asked, eyes wide, full of that hope only children dare to wear so openly. Andrew knelt again, matching her height. Only if your mom says it's okay. Sophie met her daughter's pleading eyes. She didn't say yes, didn't say no. She nodded. That was enough. As he stepped outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sidewalk in soft, golden light. Andrew Carter had walked this neighborhood twice now, once lost, once invited, and this time, something in him whispered, don't let this be temporary. She'd spent years learning how to stand on her own. He'd spent months forgetting how to feel. Neither of them knew yet. But something had already begun to grow between them. He thought he was just helping a little girl. He had no idea. He'd just met the only two people who could bring him home. Chapter 4, The Ghost from the Past. Some days felt almost normal now. Sophie had stopped flinching every time her phone rang. Emma's laughter had filled the house so often lately. It had become the new soundtrack of their lives. Even the nights didn't feel so heavy. Not when Andrew stopped by with takeout, or when Emma fell asleep, wrapped around his arm like she knew it was hers to hold. But peace doesn't ask permission before it's interrupted. It was a Friday afternoon when the call came. Sophie had just finished her shift. Her body was sore, but not in the hopeless way, the kind of sore that means I made it through another day. She stepped into the soft evening air, breathing in deep for once. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her gut made her answer. Hello. The voice on the other end was casual. Too casual? Like he had every right to be there. Hey, Soph. Long time? Her blood went cold. Derek. She hadn't heard that voice in 3 years. Not since the morning he kissed her cheek like it meant something. Packed a bag and vanished. No birthday cards, no child support, not even a text when Emma started school. Why are you calling? She managed. I've been thinking, he said, like this was just another day. Like the world hadn't turned without him. I want to see my daughter. Sophie's knees buckled. She sat on the concrete curb outside the ER, her fingers clenching around the phone. You don't get to call her that, she said, voice like steel laced with heartbreak. You gave that up the day you left. He didn't miss a beat. Yeah, well, I heard you've been spending time with a certain billionaire. That CEO guy Carter, right? Fancy dinners, flowers, sounds cozy. That's when she understood. This wasn't about Emma. It was about power. It was about control. And worst of all, it was about money. I swear to God. Derek, she whispered, if you try to drag her into something because of, I'm just saying, he cut in, slick and smug. If I'm still her legal father, maybe it's time I start thinking about my rights. She hung up, hands trembling so hard she almost dropped the phone. Breath shallow, vision blurry. Fear slammed into her chest like a freight train. Not because she believed he'd changed, but because she knew he hadn't. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't run to Andrew out of panic or desperation. She called him because she couldn't face it alone. He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his blazer, tie loosened, hair slightly windswept. When she opened the door, she didn't even speak, just stepped aside. He followed her into the kitchen. She handed him a glass of water. Then she told him everything. The call, the voice, the way Derek said, "My daughter," like the last 3 years hadn't happened, like he hadn't disappeared. She expected Andrew to offer solutions lawyers, press coverage, maybe some powerful favor from someone in his world, but he didn't. He sat beside her on the couch and said just one thing: "You're not doing this alone. Whatever happens, we fight it together." Later that night, when she tucked Emma in, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, longer than usual. She brushed the hair off her daughter's forehead, heart pounding. How do you tell a child that someone who left wants to come back? Not out of love, but out of entitlement. She didn't have answers. So instead, she whispered, "You're safe. You're mine. No one's taking you away." 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived, thick, official, her name in bold black print. Derek had filed for joint custody. He claimed he'd been denied access, said he was seeking to repair the bond. It was all carefully worded, manipulative, lies in legal language. Sophie felt sick. She stared at the papers for a long time, not moving. Andrew was the one who took them from her trembling hands. He didn't try to calm her. He didn't say, "It would be okay." He simply said, "We'll get the best attorney. I'll cover everything, and we'll prepare for a fight." And they did. Meetings, hearings, interviews. Emma's schedule was disrupted. Sophie's nerves frayed. And through it all, Andrew never once stepped away. He brought her coffee at sunrise court dates, waited outside mediation rooms with Emma when Sophie had to answer questions she didn't deserve, held her hand when her voice started to shake. The worst moment came when they had to tell Emma. Sophie knelt beside her. Heartbreaking. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "there's someone who used to be in our lives a long time ago. He's asking the court if he can be part of your life again." Emma's brow furrowed. Who?" "Your biological dad," Sophie said gently. "His name is Derek. You were really little when he left." Emma was quiet for a long time. Then, in the smallest voice, she asked, "Do I have to?" Sophie wrapped her arms around her. "No. Baby, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. You're not alone in this. Not ever." That night, Emma clutched Sophie's hand as she fell asleep. And just before drifting off, she whispered, "If that man comes back, will Andrew still be my dad?" Sophie couldn't speak for a moment. But then she said, "The only thing that mattered, Andrew loves you. That won't change, no matter what. A child should never have to question who will stay. But when the world sends storms, what matters is who stands with you when it hits." Derek thought he could re-enter their lives like he owned them. But he had underestimated one thing: the love that had grown between a man, a mother, and a little girl who already knew who her real family was. Chapter 5. The Custody War. Custody court doesn't feel like justice. It feels like surgery without anesthesia. Sophie sat on a stiff bench outside courtroom 3B, her hands balled tightly in her lap. Andrew was beside her, his calm presence anchoring her, but even his hand resting gently over hers couldn't slow the rapid beat of her heart. The petition Derek filed had been slick, well-written, calculated. He'd painted himself as a man full of regret, seeking reconciliation with his daughter. He made it sound noble, like a comeback story. But Sophie knew better, and so did Andrew. Inside the courtroom, Derek sat in a collared shirt and borrowed sincerity. He made eye contact with the judge, smiled politely. To anyone else, he might have looked like a man trying to right his wrongs. But Sophie knew those eyes. She had seen the real version of that man, the one who had kissed her like a habit and left like a ghost. No apologies, no explanations, just a quiet door. Click at 6:45 in the morning. Emma didn't understand the legal parts, but she felt the tension. She asked quiet questions at bedtime. Will I have to live somewhere else? What if I don't like him? Can I still stay here? Where my books are? Sophie answered with honesty wrapped in reassurance. No one will ever take you where love doesn't live. I promise. Andrew never made promises he couldn't keep, but he showed up over and over. He read legal documents until midnight. He sat beside Sophie in lawyer meetings, always letting her speak first. He didn't try to be the hero. He simply stood still, the way only someone who truly cared can. The hardest part came when the judge requested a private interview with Emma. Just 15 minutes. No pressure, they said. Just a chance for her to share how she felt with a court-appointed child psychologist present. Sophie couldn't eat that morning. Andrew drove them quietly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on her knee when they hit red lights. At the courthouse, Emma held Sophie's hand tight. Do I have to say everything? She asked. No, Sophie said softly. Just say what's true for you. Emma nodded once, then walked into the room alone, her blue headband trembling slightly as the door closed behind her. 15 minutes stretched like hours. Sophie kept her eyes on the hallway clock. Andrew didn't say a word, just sat close, a quiet shield of presence. When the door opened, Emma walked out calm. No tears, no visible distress, just quiet resolve. The psychologist gave a small, kind smile. She spoke clearly, she said, and bravely. Later that afternoon, Sophie and Andrew met with their attorney to hear the outcome of the session. The court would consider Emma's voice significant, and the psychologist had written a formal recommendation that forcing a child into a relationship she didn't understand with a man she hadn't seen since age 3 was not in her best interest. But the real moment came a day later, when the psychologist shared what Emma had said. She had spoken softly, but without hesitation. My real dad is the one who danced with me when I was sad. He didn't leave. He stayed. He shows up. That's the kind of dad I want. Sophie cried when she heard it. So did Andrew, though he tried not to show it. He turned his face slightly toward the window, blinking hard, before whispering, She chose me back. A week later, the court issued its decision. Derek's petition for joint custody was denied. He had no legal rights, no standing, and no relationship to claim. The judge made it clear, parental rights are not a performance. They are a presence. Sophie and Andrew returned home exhausted but victorious. The house was quiet when they walked in. Emma had stayed with a neighbor during the hearing. When she came through the front door, she dropped her backpack on the floor, ran straight to Andrew, and without a word, threw her arms around his waist. "Are you still my dance dad?" she asked. He didn't speak. He just knelt down, wrapped her in his arms, and whispered, "Always. You don't need DNA to be someone's father. You just need to stay when no one else does." The court gave Sophie peace, but Emma had already given Andrew something far more powerful, her trust. Chapter 6 is after the storm. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes after you've been holding your breath for too long. Not silence, but the absence of fear. That's what the days felt like after the court ruling. Sophie didn't jump every time the mail arrived. She stopped checking the front door twice before locking it at night. She no longer rehearsed worst-case scenarios in her mind before falling asleep. It was as if the storm had passed, and she was still standing. But the strangest part wasn't the safety. It was the peace, a peace so quiet, so unfamiliar, that it almost felt like guilt. She caught herself one night, humming while folding laundry, and stopped. almost afraid to enjoy it, until Emma ran into the room, wearing a blanket like a cape, and shouted, "Mom! Andrew's teaching me how to make popcorn without burning it." Sophie blinked and then laughed, not politely, not tiredly, a real laugh, one she didn't know she still had. Andrew never once celebrated the court victory like a win. He didn't post anything, didn't toast, didn't brag. He simply stayed. He slipped into their lives the way sunlight finds its way through old curtains, gently, persistently, without asking permission. He showed up for Sunday dinner with bags of groceries, carried Sophie's laundry basket upstairs when her back hurt, learned how Emma liked her pancakes crispy on the edges, with exactly 3 chocolate chips. He became a part of their rhythm, not loud, not demanding, just there. Sophie noticed the little things first, how Emma looked for him in every room, how she reached for his hand on walks without even thinking, how she talked to him about school, the way kids only do when they know someone is listening, not just hearing. And Andrew, he looked lighter. He didn't smile often, not the public kind, but in their home, he laughed with his whole face. He let Emma drag him onto the floor to color. He made spaghetti one night and nearly burned the sauce while showing her how to twirl noodles on a spoon. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. He started being present. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sophie stood at the sink rinsing out a glass. Outside, the porch light cast a soft yellow glow across the backyard. She watched through the window as Andrew knelt next to a lopsided birdhouse he and Emma had made. The paint was crooked. The roof was slightly caved in, but he handled it like it was sacred, adjusting the nails gently, brushing away dust. He looked up and caught her watching, smiled. Something caught in her chest. She wasn't sure when it had happened, when this man had become a fixture, not just in Emma's life, but in her own. She hadn't let herself feel it before, not really. But now, with the court battle behind them, with Emma sleeping peacefully upstairs, with the smell of soap and wood shavings in the air, she felt it like a quiet ache. Love, not the dazzling kind, not the desperate kind, the slow, earned kind, the kind that shows up with a tool belt and 2 hands and says, "I'll build with you." When he came inside, hair tousled, a smudge of green paint on his jaw, Sophie handed him a towel. "Thanks," he said, grinning. "We may have created a safety hazard." Sophie chuckled, then paused, her voice quieter than she expected. "Thank you for all of this." For her, Andrew shrugged, as if it were nothing. But Sophie shook her head, eyes locking with his. "You chose us. You didn't have to. That means something." He looked at her, really looked like he was seeing through every cracked wall she still carried. "And then," softly, "I'd choose you again." Every time, they didn't kiss. They didn't fall into each other's arms. They just stood there, in the soft hum of a quiet kitchen. 2 people learning what it meant to stay. The deepest love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it enters slowly, with groceries, with bedtime stories, with someone who shows up and never leaves. They had survived the storm, but what waited ahead wasn't just peace. It was the beginning of a life, one they never thought they'd be allowed to hope for. Chapter 6, After the Storm. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes after you've been holding your breath for too long. Not silence, but the absence of fear. That's what the days felt like after the court ruling. Sophie didn't jump every time the mail arrived. She stopped checking the front door twice before locking it at night. She no longer rehearsed worst-case scenarios in her mind before falling asleep. It was as if the storm had passed, and she was still standing. But the strangest part wasn't the safety. It was the peace, a peace so quiet, so unfamiliar, that it almost felt like guilt. She caught herself one night, humming while folding laundry, and stopped, almost afraid to enjoy it, until Emma ran into the room, wearing a blanket like a cape, and shouted, "Mom, Andrew's teaching me how to make popcorn without burning it." Sophie blinked and then laughed. Not politely, not tiredly. A real laugh, one she didn't know she still had. Andrew never once celebrated the court victory like a win. He didn't post anything, didn't toast, didn't brag. He simply stayed. He slipped into their lives the way sunlight finds its way through old curtains, gently, persistently, without asking permission. He showed up for Sunday dinner with bags of groceries, carried Sophie's laundry basket upstairs when her back hurt, learned how Emma liked her pancakes crispy on the edges, with exactly 3 chocolate chips. He became a part of their rhythm, not loud, not demanding, just there. Sophie noticed the little things first. How Emma looked for him in every room. How she reached for his hand on walks without even thinking. How she talked to him about school, the way kids only do when they know someone is listening, not just hearing. And Andrew, he looked lighter. He didn't smile often, not the public kind, but in their home, he laughed with his whole face. He let Emma drag him onto the floor to color. He made spaghetti one night and nearly burned the sauce while showing her how to twirl noodles on a spoon. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. He started being present. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sophie stood at the sink, rinsing out a glass. Outside, the porch light cast a soft yellow glow across the backyard. She watched through the window as Andrew knelt next to a lopsided birdhouse he and Emma had made. The paint was crooked. The roof was slightly caved in, but he handled it like it was sacred, adjusting the nails gently, brushing away dust. He looked up and caught her watching, smiled. Something caught in her chest. She wasn't sure when it had happened. When this man had become a fixture not just in Emma's life, but in her own. She hadn't let herself feel it before. Not really. But now, with the court battle behind them, with Emma sleeping peacefully upstairs, with the smell of soap and wood shavings in the air, she felt it like a quiet ache. Love, not the dazzling kind, not the desperate kind, the slow, earned kind, the kind that shows up with a tool belt and 2 hands and says, "I'll build with you." When he came inside, hair tousled, a smudge of green paint on his jaw, Sophie handed him a towel. "Thanks," he said, grinning. "We may have created a safety hazard," Sophie chuckled, then paused, her voice quieter than she expected. "Thank you for all of this." For her, Andrew shrugged, as if it were nothing. But Sophie shook her head, eyes locking with his. "You chose us. You didn't have to." "That means something." He looked at her, really looked like he was seeing through every cracked wall she still carried. And then, softly, "I'd choose you again, every time." They didn't kiss. They didn't fall into each other's arms. They just stood there in the soft hum of a quiet kitchen, 2 people learning what it meant to stay. The deepest love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it enters slowly with groceries, with bedtime stories, with someone who shows up and never leaves. They had survived the storm, but what waited ahead wasn't just peace. It was the beginning of a life, one they never thought they'd be allowed to hope for. Chapter 7. A home built on love, somewhere between late spring and early summer. Their lives took on a rhythm so natural, Sophie almost didn't notice when it began to feel like theirs. Emma's drawings were no longer signed with just her name. Now, little stick figures appeared in crayon. A girl with a ribbon, a mom in scrubs, and a man with messy hair and a smile. Sometimes, a baby was there too, holding a balloon, just in case, Emma would say, grinning. Andrew had become more than a regular visitor. He was part of the structure now. He had a drawer in the hallway for the spare hoodie Emma insisted he keep it. He knew how Sophie took her coffee light. No sugar, but only on Sundays. He knew which bills sat unopened on the kitchen counter. and never asked why he simply handed Sophie dinner when she looked too tired to cook. And Sophie, she had stopped waiting for him to disappear. The panic that used to flutter in her chest every time something felt too good had begun to fade, not all at once, but in pieces. Every small act, washing Emma's hair, replacing the broken drawer handle, brushing paint chips off the porch was one more piece of evidence. He was staying. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them sat in the backyard, working on a new birdhouse. Emma called it their forever project, mostly because she changed her mind about the design every 10 minutes. Andrew didn't correct her. He just helped, even when she used too much glue, even when she dropped the tiny hammer on her foot. Sophie sat nearby, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the two of them through narrowed eyes against the sun, and something unspoken clicked inside her. It wasn't just love she was feeling. It was belonging, the kind that doesn't need permission, the kind that just exists. She wasn't used to that. She was used to surviving, enduring, making everything work on her own, because no one else would. But now, there was someone else, someone who didn't need to be asked, who saw the mess, the cracks, the long nights, and came anyway. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sophie walked into the living room with 2 cups of tea. Andrew was sitting on the couch, one arm draped across the back, looking at an old photo album Emma had pulled off the shelf earlier. The photos were faded, some torn at the edges. Sophie sat beside him, their knees touched. That was her 3rd birthday, she said, pointing to one picture, the last one before he left. Andrew didn't speak. He simply nodded, then turned the page. You know, Sophie said after a long pause, I used to think I could do it all. I told myself, if I just worked harder, slept less, smiled more, I could fill in the gap he left behind. She looked down. But the truth is, there was always going to be a space I couldn't fill. Not because I wasn't enough, but because some things aren't meant to be done alone. Andrew reached for her hand. No rush, no pressure, just warmth. You were never not enough, he said. Sophie blinked, trying not to let the tears spill over. I know, she whispered, but it still feels different now that someone sees it. A few nights later, Emma crawled onto Andrew's lap during one of his video calls, headphones still dangling from his ears, his voice echoing through the room as he tried to explain quarterly numbers to a boardroom full of people. Sorry, he said into the mic, laughing. My boss just arrived. Emma grinned. She kissed his cheek, then slid off and went back to coloring. No one watching that call knew how much that one moment meant, but Sophie did, because she saw it all from the kitchen. And when their eyes met, she smiled, not with uncertainty, not with hesitation, but with the quiet, grateful clarity of someone who finally knew. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't a favor. This was real. Love doesn't always shout its arrival. Sometimes it grows through shared chores, spilled juice, and the way someone looks at your child, like she's the whole world. Sophie had learned how to stand on her own, but now, for the first time in years, she was learning how to lean without falling. Chapter 8. The letter that closed the door. The envelope was plain. No logo, no return address, just Sophie's name, handwritten in a style she hadn't seen in years. She found it wedged between a utility bill and a grocery flyer on a Tuesday morning. The air was humid. Her coffee had gone cold, and Emma was in the next room asking where the scissors went. It should have been nothing. But the moment she saw the handwriting sharp, slightly slanted, she sat down hard in the nearest chair. Derek! Her hands trembled as she opened it. The edge of the paper, slicing her finger slightly, and still, she didn't stop. The first line wasn't cruel. It wasn't warm. Either, it was tired. You were always better than me. Emma got that from you. He wrote from a state prison 2 counties over. fraud, assault, parole, violation. None of it related to Sophie. But somehow, it all felt connected. He didn't beg, didn't make excuses. He wrote like a man who'd already lost everything and finally knew it. I thought I was coming back to take something that was mine, but I see now. I never earned it. She's not mine. I'm not hers. Sophie read it 3 times before realizing there was another document tucked behind it. A notarized statement, short, legal, binding, parental rights fully relinquished, no appeals, no conditions, no claims, just an end. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter in one hand, her coffee forgotten beside her. She had spent years waiting for this, for him to admit what he did, for him to go away officially, permanently, legally. And now that it had arrived, she didn't feel triumph. She felt light and a little sad, not for herself, not even for Emma, but for the man he could have been and never became. Later that day, Andrew arrived with a bag of groceries in one hand and Emma's forgotten lunchbox in the other. She met him at the door, wordless, just placed the envelope in his hands. He read it carefully, his eyebrows knit in concentration. When he reached the final signature, he let out a long breath. I didn't think he had this in him, he said softly. Neither did I, Sophie replied. They didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to say, just the quiet hum of a dishwasher in the background and the feeling of something heavy finally leaving the room. That night, Sophie didn't read the letter aloud to Emma. She didn't mention prison or courts or laws. Instead, she tucked her into bed, sat beside her with the soft glow of the nightlight, painting stars across the ceiling, and said, "Sometimes people come into our lives and leave. Sometimes they come back, thinking they still belong. But the bravest people, like you, know how to choose what feels safe." Emma blinked slowly, thinking, so now it's just us. Sophie smiled, brushed a loose curl from her daughter's cheek. It's always been us. Now, it's just more official. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I like our us, she said. Then added, grinning, especially with pancakes. They made blueberry pancakes for dinner, half burned, over-syruped, the kitchen a mess of laughter and flour. Andrew arrived halfway through, still in his work clothes, still looking like someone important, but only caring about this. Sophie handed him a spatula. He didn't ask what the letter said, didn't press. He just cooked beside her, danced with Emma when the timer beeped, kissed Sophie on the forehead when he passed by. And that night, when the house was finally quiet, Sophie sat beside him on the porch, stars dusting the sky overhead. Her voice was soft when she said it. I think this is the first time in years I don't feel like I'm waiting for something to fall apart. Andrew didn't respond right away. He took her hand in his. That's because we're not borrowing time anymore, he said. We're building it. The past doesn't always apologize, but when it does, and you're strong enough to let it go, what's left behind is something softer than closure. Peace. Sophie didn't just receive freedom on paper. She felt it in her bones in the sound of her daughter's laughter, in the way Andrew never flinched. In the home, they were finally allowed to make their own. Chapter 9. The Gala and the Proposal. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a dentist reminder card and a coupon for laundry detergent. Heavy cardstock, cream with gold, edging. Sophie opened it without thinking, wiping pancake batter from her hands. It read, "The Aurora Foundation requests the honor of Andrew Carter and guests. An evening of elegance in support of children's advocacy. Formal attire, dinner, silent auction. One night, beneath the chandeliers," she smiled, unsurprised. Andrew was on the board. Of course he'd been invited. When he arrived later that evening, Emma ran to the door with glitter on her cheeks. and a drawing in hand. Sophie handed him the envelope with a smirk. Looks like the fancy people still want you. Andrew raised an eyebrow, glancing at the invite. I usually just send a check and skip the part with small talk and shrimp. Emma perked up from the kitchen table. Can I go? Sophie started to laugh, already forming the gentle no. But Andrew crouched beside Emma's chair. Well, he said, mock serious. It's not really a kid party. But what if we made an exception? Emma lit up. Really? Andrew glanced at Sophie over Emma's head. Only smiled. Only if her mom comes too. That's how Sophie ended up standing in front of the mirror a week later, wearing a navy dress she hadn't touched in years. Not since the weddings. Not since the versions of herself she barely remembered. The dress still fit, but it wasn't about the size. It was about the way she looked at herself. Not trying to reclaim the girl she used to be, but honoring the woman she'd become. A woman who had survived heartbreak, fought for her daughter, and had finally somehow found her way back to hope. Emma wore pale gold, her hair swept into a bun with a star-shaped clip. Andrew arrived in a tailored black tux, holding a bouquet of daisies for Emma, and a single gardenia for Sophie. He didn't say much when he saw them, just stood still for a long moment, his eyes soft, as if he were memorizing the moment before it passed. The ballroom shimmered. Golden light spilled from chandeliers strung like constellations, ivory linens, gentle jazz, a string quartet playing near the stage. Sophie stepped inside and immediately felt underdressed until Andrew leaned in and whispered, "Everyone's looking at you. You're the most beautiful thing in this room." She rolled her eyes, smiled anyway, let him take her hand. They danced slow at first, then took turns spinning Emma across the floor, her laughter rising above the music like bells. People watched them, but not because of Andrew's name. They watched because of the way they moved together, like love that wasn't polished, but real, earned, honest, effortless. As the music faded and guests returned to their seats for the silent auction, Andrew stood, cleared his throat, took the microphone. Sophie looked up in surprise. He hadn't said anything about a speech. The room quieted. "I know most of you know me as a businessman," Andrew began. "A tech guy, a name on a magazine." He paused, glanced down at Emma, who had climbed up onto a chair beside Sophie. "But tonight, I don't want to talk about companies or markets. I want to talk about one moment." He inhaled slowly. "Not long ago, I walked past a dance school and saw a little girl sitting on the steps. She said 4 words that stopped me in my tracks. It's the daddy dance, and I'm alone." Sophie's chest tightened. Andrew continued, "I asked if I could be hers, just for that one dance. I thought it would be a moment, a kind gesture. I didn't know it would be the beginning of everything." The room was still. He looked across it, voice steady but soft. "Sometimes, the people who need us the most aren't asking for grand promises. They're just hoping someone will stop long enough to see them." He turned to the crowd again. "That's why, tonight, I'm matching every donation made. Not for PR, not for headlines, but because I believe that one small act of presence can change everything." Applause rose, thunderous and sincere. But Andrew didn't leave the stage. He looked straight at Sophie. And speaking of imagining more, a ripple moved through the crowd as the spotlight shifted. "Sophie, will you come up here for a moment?" Sophie froze. Emma grabbed her hand and tugged. She stood. Her heart felt too big for her chest. She didn't remember walking, just arriving. Andrew stepped down, met her at the foot of the stage. "I didn't plan this here," he said. Low enough, only she could hear. "But I realized something. I don't want to wait." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small velvet box. "I've waited through too many silent years. I want this life with you, with her, forever." He opened the box. The ring was simple, elegant, real. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Not for a title, but because I want to wake up beside you. And because I want Emma to never have to wonder who her father is ever again. Sophie's hands were shaking. Her voice caught, but the answer was already in her eyes. Yes, the crowd erupted. Emma squealed, wrapped herself around both of them. Andrew held them close. And as the music started again, as they danced with tears and quiet laughter, Sophie whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever get a beginning again." Andrew kissed her forehead. "This isn't a beginning," he said. "It's the life we were always meant to find. Some love stories don't start with chemistry or perfection. They begin in heartbreak and bloom in the quiet decision to stay." This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a family. Finally whole. Finally real. Finally home. Chapter 10. The family we chose. They didn't get married in a cathedral. No designer gowns, no magazine coverage. Just a quiet ceremony under a canopy of maple trees in a public park with Emma standing between them. Wearing a flower crown she'd insisted on making herself. Andrew wore a navy tie that Emma picked out. Sophie wore her hair loose for the first time in years. The vows were whispered, not projected. And when Andrew slipped the ring on her hand, Sophie whispered, "Thank you for finding us." He replied simply, "You were never lost." They bought a house on the edge of the city, not a mansion, not a fortress of steel and glass. It was small, worn in the right ways, with a crooked porch and a garden full of wildflowers. Sophie chose it, and Andrew called it sacred. They painted Emma's new room lavender, hung fairy lights from the ceiling, and filled the shelves with her favorite books. Her shoes were always dirty from the backyard. Her drawings covered every corner of the fridge. One day, over breakfast, she called Andrew Dad, not with hesitation, not with ceremony, just casually, mid-sentence. "Dad, can you pass the syrup?" He froze. So did Sophie. And Emma, as if sensing the shift, looked up. "What?" she asked, shrugging. "That's who he is." Later that night, Andrew sat with Sophie on the porch, the stars pressing soft against the dark sky. "I didn't think anything would ever mean more to me than building a company," he said, then smiled. "I was wrong." A year later, they welcomed a son, Oliver Carter, red-faced and loud. Born in a thunderstorm just past midnight, Sophie held him against her chest, trembling with exhaustion. Tears in her eyes, Andrew kissed her forehead, one hand on Oliver's tiny back, the other wrapped around them both, like a vow without words. Emma tiptoed into the hospital room the next morning, eyes wide. Steps slow. "Can I hold him?" she asked. Voice small. Andrew helped her settle onto the chair, placed Oliver gently in her arms. She stared at her brother for a long time. "He's kind of wrinkly," she whispered, then grinned. "But I like him." Their days weren't perfect. There were sleepless nights, toddler meltdowns, cold dinners reheated 3 times, and laundry that never seemed to end. But there was also laughter, deep and loud, and the kind of comfort that only comes from knowing that no one's going anywhere. Andrew still ran his company, but he turned down late meetings, came home in time for dinner, started taking Sundays off. Success didn't look like headlines anymore. It looked like Emma shouting "Daddy" from the swing set, like Sophie's hand in his beneath the baby monitor, like Saturday pancakes, even when they were burned. The spring recital came again. Emma was one of the older girls now. She'd helped choreograph the piece. She stood tall in the front row, hair bound perfect, her blue dress shimmering faintly beneath the stage lights. Sophie sat in the front row, Oliver asleep against her chest. Andrew held her hand, and when Emma stepped onto the stage and began to dance fierce, eyes, graceful, glowing, Sophie's heart swelled until it ached. Because she remembered the girl in the first recital, the one who had sat outside alone, waiting, the one who had whispered, It's the daddy dance, and I'm alone. And she remembered the man in the gray suit who hadn't kept walking. After the show, Emma ran into their arms. Andrew lifted her off the ground. "You were amazing," he said. "Did you see me do the triple spin?" she asked. "I saw everything." Then she pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket. "This is for you," she said. "I made it at school." He opened it. Crayon on construction paper. 4 stick figures beneath a banner that said, "My family." A tall man in a suit, a woman with long hair, a little girl with a ribbon, and a baby with a round head. At the bottom, "Thank you for choosing us." Andrew pressed the paper to his chest. "You chose me too," he whispered. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep and the house had quieted into that sacred kind of stillness, Sophie stood in the kitchen, watching Andrew fix the leaky faucet he swore he'd get 2 weeks ago. She crossed her arms, smiling. "You know," she said, "you don't have to fix everything." Andrew looked up. "I'm not trying to fix it," he said. "I just like being here." She stepped closer, wrapped her arms around his waist, rested her head on his chest. "I like you being here too." They stood there for a long time, the faucet dripping softly beside them. No more courtrooms, no more letters, no more waiting, just them. A mother, a father, a daughter, a son, a life they chose, together. Sometimes, the people we were meant to love aren't found in fairy tales. Sometimes, they're found on the sidewalk outside a dance school. When someone finally decides to stop walking, it started with 4 words, "It's the daddy dance," and ended with one unspoken truth. Love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay. She used to dream of rescue, of someone stepping in, fixing the broken things, rewriting the chapters she never asked to live. But real love didn't arrive like that. It didn't knock with a cape or grand promises. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't even say, "I can save you." It just said, "I see you. I'll stay." And somehow, that was more powerful than any rescue ever could be. Andrew Carter wasn't supposed to be walking down that street. Emma wasn't supposed to be sitting on those steps. And Sophie wasn't supposed to find the life she never dared to hope for. But love has a way of finding us when we're not performing, when we're not posing, when we're just tired and still trying. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment, one glance, one question, one stranger who stops long enough to ask, "Do you want to dance?" So, if this story found you at the right time, if you've ever felt like the girl on the steps waiting to be chosen, or like the mother surviving with grace and grit, or like the man carrying grief in a perfect suit, then this story is yours. 2. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need the right clothes, the right timing, or the right words. You just need someone who stays. And if you haven't found them yet, don't give up. They might be just one wrong turn away. If this story moved you, there's another one waiting, and it goes even deeper. More healing, more hope, more love that stays. See you in the next story. And until then, don't stop believing that your moment is still coming. We'd love to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it between 0 and 10. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you're always updated. More inspiring stories are waiting. Click here to watch them.